Here we go. Hello. We would like to welcome our audience, both here and on our Facebook feed, our live stream, to the 2018 Young Ambassadors Program. It's called Representing Contemporary Latino Communities Conversation. That's the name of this event. We're live from the National Museum of American History in Washington, D.C. Our conversation today will focus on how we represent Latino communities in various forms of media. We are joined by Alex Pena, a digital journalist with CBS News, Gabby Rivera, writer whose work includes the young adult novel Juliet Takes a Breath and America for Marvel Comics, and we have Benito Sánchez, who has worked with TV and film companies such as Bad Robot, Starz Productions, and he is also an alum of this program from 2009. What? Yes. See? You can go places. My name is Alberto Ferreras. I will be the moderator, and the Smithsonian Latino Center would like to thank Ford Motor Company Fund for their continued support and partnership over the past 11 years with the Young Ambassadors Program. If you have any questions, please place them on the, that's for you, camera, people at home, place them in the comment section of the live stream, and we hope to get to them at the end of the conversation, okay? And now we're going to start the conversation with a question for you, which I think is going to be interesting for you, which is how do you get from high school to where you are? I mean, not every detail, but you know.
Me first.
You first, yeah.
Okay.
Let's start with you, Alex.
Well, in terms of where I am now, just so you have an idea, I'm a digital journalist at CBS News, which CBS Network is what essentially makes me, I'm a shooter, producer, common term would be multimedia reporter for all platforms and networks, whether it's television, online, to Twitter and radio. You know, we kind of do it all. And the way I really got there, and we were sort of talking about this amongst each other previously, was like, you know, our generation, whether it's journalism or media in general, I feel like we sort of like blew up what was a very consistent track to get to the top. In my field, it was generally you went to college and got a bachelor's degree. You got a small television job in a market in Ohio or Kansas, somewhere small, and then you know, 2 years there, 2 years here, and you eventually made your way up to the top. That's one way to do it. I did it totally differently. A week after graduating college, I had my journalism degree. I bought a small camera, I packed my backpack, and I bought a one-way ticket to East Africa.
Hey.
Not for everybody, but it's one way to do it, right? Like I knew what I wanted to do. I knew that there were stories out there to be told, and it felt real silly for me to kind of sidetrack, you know, my way through someone else's system. And with the tools that we had now, I did it. You know, so you went out, you talked to people, you upload to YouTube. I started calling networks. I had like a 2-page list of phone numbers of producers back at the networks in the U.S. that I knew that I can call, and I went to Somalia and shot 5 minutes of video, 10 minutes of interviews, and 15 photos, and I would start calling. Hey, I've got this, are we willing to buy it for this? No. All the way down until someone bought it. Someone buys it, now you're a network news producer, right? Like or a network news journalist. That's really the way it works. And it's important to know that like you have the tools to do that now. So that's the way I started. I started as a freelancer for 3 to 4 years doing that, traveling all over the world, doing the stories I wanted. But at the end of the day, I always sort of knew that my goal was to do network news, and it's purely based off the audience. There's nothing like knowing that a story at the end of your day is going to be seen by a million plus people, what you work on. And then, you know, off the conversations we're going to have today, that's very important to make sure that people are seeing your work and it's hearing your voice. So that was sort of my track, and it's still to be determined where I end up, but I'm real happy with where I'm at now.
Yeah. Benito.
Yeah, so I feel very similar. You know, just working in Los Angeles and working in Hollywood was not something that I thought I was going to do when I was in high school. I grew up in Nebraska, so that's very far away from California. But I knew that if I wanted to get there, I had to sort of not take no for an answer a lot of times. And so, especially in Nebraska, I just had to like get any professional experience I possibly could and just network the crap out of it. And I'm sure you guys have put an emphasis on networking, but I definitely would not be where I'm at without just taking down names and taking down emails and like asking for emails and just being super, not, you know, there's a certain tact to it certainly, but like being aggressive about, okay, I'm going to follow up with this person, and who knows, like in 10 years, 5 years, I've had it where it's like, oh, I remember you from a program that I did like 5 years ago, and like maybe we should reconnect now that I'm in Los Angeles, and maybe that's going to lead to an introduction to somebody else, and maybe that'll lead to a job here and there. So I think that's really important for you guys to just understand, and I'm sure you guys do already, but that's one of the biggest reasons that I've been able to get my start. You know, I'm working as a director's assistant now. I used to work at Bad Robot, as you mentioned, and none of those opportunities.
Tell us a couple of movies, just in case you guys don't know, you know, what
Yeah.
the...
So while I was at Bad Robot, we worked on Star Trek Beyond, which came out about a year ago. Cloverfield Paradox, which came out on Netflix during the Super Bowl. There's one called Overlord that's going to come out this fall. It's going to be really good. It's probably my personal favorite, so go see that. JJ, thank me for that later. No, just kidding. But no, I mean, there's no way that I wouldn't. There's no way I would have gotten there had I not just been aggressive with my networking. And I'll sort of mirror what you said. There's no set path to get where you're at, and so this is going to be kind of unconventional advice maybe, but I would just be wary of any advice that anyone gives you, because I've been counseled by some mentors that I really admire, and I just, you know, I've done the opposite of what they've told me just because I knew that I wanted to forge my own path. And I think it's really important to understand that any sort of success that you're going to have is because of you and because of your experiences, and you know, your unique story is not going to be the same as mine. And so I can sort of offer you advice and guidance, but at the end of the day, it is going to be up to you guys to figure it out. And that's, you know, that's adult life. And it's
So
exciting.
that will be the end of this conversation. I'm kidding.
Yeah, I mean, obviously.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Gabby,
Oh my goodness, hello. Look at all of you. My goodness, you know how much joy it brings me to see you sitting here with your like sleepy smiles because you just ate, and like y'all are so smart and put together in the Smithsonian. This is like, to me, this is like legendary, like iconic stuff. So I'm so happy to be here with y'all. And as for me, listen, like high school to here, it was just a little bit of a wild path, right? At one point outside of high school, like I grew up mad normal, right? Two parents living in the Bronx, right? A little bit of a nice little house. They sent us to a good school. My mom was a teacher. Dad worked for Café Bustelo. Oh my God, we had good coffee in the house all the time. But then I got out of that safety zone and I came out, and like I got really freaked out too, because I was like, this isn't gonna work. How am I gonna survive? Like, I am gender non-conforming, right? Like, I don't look like, you know, Latina, right? Like, I'm not like Sofia Vergara or nothing. And Latino spaces are pretty like gender specific, right? But so is the rest of the world. So I was like, how am I gonna run around with short hair, with my tattoos, be free and be happy? No one's gonna hire me at their bank. You know what I mean? People don't want me even dating their daughter. They ain't gonna give me no mortgage or a job. You know what I'm saying? Like, so I was kind of like, what am I gonna do? How am I gonna survive? And I made a promise to myself. I was like, well, whatever you do, you can't survive in hiding. So you gotta be able to be out, right? And you gotta be able to like wear what you want, because that's part of my presentation and my general comfort. Like, you know, like if I had to go somewhere where I had to put on a dress every day, I felt like a little part of me was gonna die every day, right? Like, so I just was like, what am I gonna do that's gonna make me happy? What am I gonna do that's gonna allow me to thrive in my body and in my personhood? And for me, that was like the arts community, right? Like, everybody loves a freaky queer in the arts community, you know? Like, you can go to the open mics, be how you are. I found work on TV film sets, because on TV film sets, as long as you show up, they don't care if you have like a pineapple on your head. You know what I'm saying? Like, show up and do the work. And so I always hustled and I always did work in the arts industry, but I always made sure to advocate for my passions. So I was a poet and a writer. And so when I would be working on shows like Boardwalk Empire or Ugly Betty, I'd always tell my manager, like, I'm the best worker you have. And what I need from you is to let me go to this spot on the Lower East Side and do my poetry. And I was thankful. I was lucky enough to have bosses who took me seriously and were like, okay, we're going to make sure that happens. And I was always writing in between red lights, at elevators, and just always sticking to what was going to keep me alive and happy and what was going to be my passion. And I think like always being invested in the communities that were exciting to me, right? So like being invested in the New York City Latina Writers Group. Oh my God, they saved my life. Like I just showed up at this door in Harlem and it opened up to these like magnificent Dominican, Puerto Rican, Colombian women who were writing and being like, yo, you can do this. You can thrive. Look at us. Like, would you like some cafecito? Look, pray at my altar. Like, we're gonna do this, you know? So it's like I made sure to like connect to the communities that I felt were gonna like help me flourish. And that's a different type of networking, right? It's like a spiritual networking too, you know? And then for me, the other piece was like making sure that I did my work. So if an anthology was like, we want to publish one of your poems, I made sure I submitted that poem on time, proofread, ready. You know, when I was writing for the internet too. Again, Newsweek wasn't looking for me to work, you know what I mean? Like, so where did I write? Like Autostraddle, queer women's blogs, like places that were just happy to have me and not places that I had to convince to accept me. You know what I'm saying? So I was doing my work and it's like, you complete the things, turn in the things, accumulate the work that you do, and be able to have stuff to show other people. You know, like that happened with Juliet Takes a Breath too, right? I was in my mama's basement writing that, but I finished it, you know? And so that was the thing that like got me here. It's always doing what I love, making sure that I'm safe, and like connecting with folks in that community, and like, yeah, elevating my work and elevating the work of others.
So let me ask you about the representation of Latino community on your specific medium, and you know we can start now with you.
Hey.
Because you're a writer, you have your own comic. I mean, for you it's actually I don't know if you guys are familiar with America Chavez, and so tell us how have you managed to give your idea of what the Latino community is through your work, and then we'll
yeah.
go on.
Well, it's wild, right? Because like the Latino community, like what is that, right? Even the term Latino is basically the United States being like, oh, y'all were born there and now you're here, so we're gonna call you Latinos. You know what I mean? And you're from this island and these countries, and so that makes you this thing. And so for them, I think, and for this country, it's easy to classify us as this thing, right? Latinos. And I think now we're building like a really dope radical consciousness into what it means to be Latino, right? But we're not a monolith. And so for me, the important thing was just talking about my story. I'd never read stories about like modern day, like Puerto Ricans in the Bronx, you know? Like I'd read like Sánchez Cisneros and like 100 Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and I always felt like I was reading some like historical piece, you know, like those were people from a long time ago, almost also speaking in a language that I couldn't understand, like that type of older English, you know. And I was like, well, where are we? And so basically I just wanted to tell the story of like my family and myself. Like, what does it mean to be like a goofy, nerdy, chubby brown girl, like growing up in the Bronx, listening to Nirvana, and also like trying to survive, right? So for me, that's what it was. It was less.
Did you find resistance? I mean, when you're saying like, hey, this is what I want to pitch. This is my idea of a comic.
For America Chavez?
For America Chavez.
Oh, okay. So like I wrote my book, and I wrote it for myself, and then I kicked it out into the world, and it was done, and it did okay in the like indie circles, and Marvel came to me. Somebody at Marvel, actually Will Moss, this is a good story. This is a good story about how white people can utilize their power in an industry to open up doors for other folks, because America Chavez is a character that existed in the Marvel universe for like 6 years. She was like a tough-ass Latina, punches portals through other dimensions, but she'd always been like a side character, Young Avengers, Team Brigade, like she never had her own story. And so when they were looking to develop it, Will Moss, who is a editor, I think has done like Howard the Duck, Spider-Man, stuff like that, was like, well, I could kick it to Joe, who does everything, or I could make sure that I look for female writers or writers of color, and so that's what he did. And so because my completed work was out in the world, he found it doing his work. and invited me to work for Marvel Comics. And so again, I was terrified, right? Because I'm like, well, that's great, but are they gonna push me to make this a certain way? And I was lucky enough where I was working with a team with Will, who was like, no, whatever you wanna do, however you wanna portray her, whatever story you wanna tell, we're gonna support you, we're gonna lift you up, and we're gonna utilize our Marvel expertise to make it better. And so I felt like I hit the jackpot, because I was like, I feel like that doesn't necessarily. I've been in situations where that's not the case. They hire you so they can check a box, and then they want to tell you how to do your job. They want to tell you how to communicate with the Latino community, you know. And so this was different. And then with America, I like wanted to have a moment where like in a story, a brown girl could be like free and just travel the world and figure out who she is and read and learn about who her abuela is and find family and find community, and less like a comic about like, let me tackle the everyday issues that we are facing right now. I did a little bit towards the end, but I was like, damn, we are exhausted. Why is it that other folks get to just have fantasy stories and we always have to have stuff that's like rooted so deeply to oppression and trauma?
It's the chancleta syndrome.
Hey, what?
Chancleta syndrome. Like no matter what you do, if it's Latino, there's gotta be a chancleta flying across the world, which is great. I guess we all receive the chancleta from them. But what can we just be everything and anything we can be? Benito. So what's the deal with you?
Yeah, I was just gonna say it's extremely, it can be very challenging to push Latino stories and Latino voices in more traditional spaces like film and TV, where I've mostly done most of my work. At Bad Robot specifically, I know that they had a mandate whenever we got an actors list. So when you're producing a movie, you get these lists of actors and directors and writers, and these are the people that we sort of bring together to form these stories. And at Bad Robot, it was mandated that those lists that we would get from the agencies would be, inclusive as possible. And I remember specific moments where we would get a list and we'd be like, listen, there's too many white dudes on this list. Like, we had to call them back and be like, hey, like, we need more names. And it's a challenge for these agencies. So for me, I feel like I'm just getting to the point in my career where I can actually sort of start suggesting people that I've met personally on the street, people like you. Just be like,
we met up the street. We met right here.
No, but I'm saying, but seriously, it's like out there in the streets, It's like you have to go out there and hustle because it's not obvious. Like finding people with talent that are Latinos as well, And so, whenever, like I said, I'm getting to the point where it's like, here's a writer that I enjoy, that I've met. Do you think this might be the right person for this thing? And it's doubly challenging in feature films because it's such a traditional place where they sort of hire the same 20 writers for the same stuff. If you ever look at the credits for feature films that are being made, look at who's actually writing it, and you'll see the same name over and over and over again. I think where there's a lot of opportunity right now is actually in television, which is much quicker than film, and you're seeing programs like Vida that are being made, which is amazing and great. So you said there's some sort of consciousness reawakening. I really feel it in Los Angeles. There's groups of us that are starting to form that are just like, listen, like we need to push this agenda. The Black community has had such success in the last 5 to 10 years that we're asking ourselves like, why don't we have the same thing? And so I'm a small cog of that. I'm a small part of that. But whatever influence that I can have with the people that I'm working with whatever company I'm working with, and eventually I also want to make content as well. So it's a process. And it can be frustrating. You run into walls. You run into resistance. It's like they want a person of color in this, and it's like maybe you suggest like, hey, what about like a Latina, or like what about a Latino in this? It's not always in somebody's forefront to include Latino. It's not. Especially when they ask for a person of color for whatever reason, it's not the first choice. So
well, we also have to remember that Latinos are Black too. You know what I'm saying? Exactly. And so we just have to I think we gotta remember that when we say that Black folks have this and we should have it too. That it's when Black people succeed, we all succeed. And I know you weren't saying the opposite of that, but
but more for more representation.
Yeah.
The thing with film is that there's so much money in there that usually the excuse is that we cannot gamble
Right.
Because, with all the money, I put somebody like this and like that, and nobody's going to buy it. But then we go to the other end of the budget, which is news. And that's when Alex comes in. What is it like trying to present a faithful portrait of the community?
For me, I would say it's almost twofold in a sense, because journalism as a whole, it's like what the work that they do is amazing, and it's creative, and it's like it's storytelling, and it's art, and it's pushing like certain narratives. But like if you really break journalism down to its essence, like that's not necessarily what it should be. It should be neutral. So theoretically, a white man and a Latino can show up at the same story, and if done properly, should end up with the same result. It's a craft. It's a trade. I understand that doesn't happen. We all have our own biases and lenses that we view the world through. But theoretically, that should work. But what to me is important, aside from trying your best to do that in neutral journalism, is that every morning thousands of journalists get together across the country at 9 a.m. and they essentially, for the most part, decide what the country is going to be speaking about today. They decide what is the national conversation. It's what's going to end up on your newspaper. It's what's going to be on your headline news. And that comes from thousands of journalists across the country saying, this is important to me, this isn't important to me. And what I've learned working in network news, or just in the mainstream media, as one would say, is that we just need to be at that table. If you can get there, I think this last week with the immigration debate and what's going on the border is a great example. That's been happening for the last few months. Why all of a sudden was it plastered all over headline news? And in essence, I'm not saying it was the Latino specifically, but it takes some, one person says, well, Syria is going on today, and the economy is down today. Okay, we'll put that in the B block, and we need to talk about North Korea, and it takes someone who's maybe familiar with that story to say, oh, also, by the way, they're separating children at the border. Now you go. Now, what happens in that journalism at the border, is up for debate, because I still stand by, journalism should be very neutral, and it's a craft, but getting there is like the number one priority, and to me, that's the representation, is to be able to fight for the stories that we think are important, fight for the stories that are going to give other people a voice. Like what you guys do is your voice represented through your medium. I don't do that. I am a totally different trade in that I'm a reflection of other people's voices. So to me, that's really important. 2
stories that you're super proud of, that you are like,
proud of?
Yeah, that you, either because they were super challenging or because they were eye-openers, not just for the audience, but for your peers, that they said,
That's so tough. I'll just tell you, sometimes we do two stories a day for the last 10 years. It's a lot of stories. I mean, just recently I spent a week down in Guatemala doing stories, working on the Volcan Fuego stories. And those to me we did stories day and night, but that story, that topic was so powerful for me because it wasn't even like just Latino communities. It happened to be an indigenous community up on a mountainside where this volcano happened. And so and this goes back to saying you don't need a Latino to I am not even going to begin to try to relate to the lifestyle and culture of these people in Guatemala and Escuintla, Guatemala, right? I don't know anything about their past. Many would generalize and say, oh yeah, it's Pena can cover because he's Hispanic, right? Hey, no, that's not the case. But, I mean, my gosh, to go there and, I showed up with a camera once and this woman told me, you didn't just bring your camera, you brought hope here today.
Wow.
And to have somebody say that, you know that you're the only chance that they're going to have of getting help. You know that you're their voice. And God, that's a tough responsibility, but, it's powerful, it's important.
Briefly, just in a scale from 1 to 10, how important is for you and your career the fact that you speak Spanish?
Well, some people would say it's not even that great, but...
What?
I mean, it helps. I go because I speak Spanish at times, If they're looking around a newsroom and they're going to send somebody,
so it is an asset.
The only reason I say it's debatable is because there are people who speak better Spanish than me, and there are probably people here who speak worse Spanish, and I don't want them to think that's a factor to not pursue stories. Language is a spectrum, and just because you may not think you do it perfectly doesn't mean you should refrain from trying to tell that story. And I was saying I've struggled with that my whole life because I grew up in the States and I've not always spoke great Spanish.
There's no such thing as bad Spanish.
But that's my point. The point is I speak enough to get a story across, and that's
you
what
can
matters.
Communicate. It's a tool for you to reach out, to travel.
It's important.
Yeah,
it's important.
It's just I know that within Latino families that is part of the struggle. You want to assimilate with speaking. You don't want your kids to speak with an accent. What was it like for you too? Spanish, has it been useful?
I mean, my parents, they grew up in the Bronx when the Bronx was burning, right? Because A lot of blacks and Puerto Ricans lived in the Bronx, and the landowners and the landlords didn't care. So they burned down all the buildings to get a lot of insurance money. And also this was at a time where like you got your ass kicked if you were like Puerto Rican or a person of color, and especially if you had an accent. And how were you going to get a job, right? So my parents did not raise me and my brother to speak Spanish. They would speak to each other in Spanish and my grandparents in Spanish, and so there was like Spanish in the house around me, so I can understand. I know that if you're like, you're gonna play me or something like that, or you're calling me a name, I understand. I can ask what a bathroom is, you know? But I'm not out here like writing in Spanish. And I think to a degree, a lot of Latinos, that's like a judgmental place, right? They wanna be like, oh, you're not really Latino if you don't speak Spanish. Oh, you're not really Latino if you only speak Spanglish, you know? And I wanna be like, look, you're really mad that I can't navigate one colonized language versus another. You know what I'm saying? Like, come on, get it together.
Awesome. Because it all comes from whatever experience you have.
Yeah,
like, of course. Like, you know, why, you know.
It speaks to that broader community of like, there's just a whole spectrum of Hispanic and Latino.
It's exactly.
No, it's true.
It's diverse.
You know, especially growing up in Nebraska, like none of my friends spoke Spanish, you know, but everyone in my home did, and I was lucky that I enjoy having both languages just because it just, you see the world, you know, it opens up a different world to you, and that's advantageous to me as an artist and as someone who, you know, lives somewhere where almost everyone speaks Spanish because it's, you know, it's LA, so like that's pretty much the main language. You know, not really, but I for me it was I lost a lot of it probably from high school to up until maybe a couple years ago, and it can be embarrassing because people will judge you, and when I speak with someone who's a native speaker, it's tough to sometimes just even start a dialogue in Spanish because it's like you feel like they judge you.
And here too, right? I feel like when I've traveled, like when I've been to Mexico, the people in Oaxaca were like, yo, just practice. This is great.
Yeah.
We love you, Puerto Ricans. Like, come on, you know. And it was so like welcome, you know, like it's okay, we'd rather you try, you know?
Absolutely.
And sometimes here there's just like a lot of...
Yeah, it's like weird, and it's just like whatever, I mean, you know.
I'm with you, it's like whatever at this point, you know?
Yeah.
You get the job done, what else you want from me,
you know? I've definitely been practicing more, but it's, there's some judgment out there.
And what the one thing though, and when I talk, like I've definitely talked about like my grandparents, and like I talk a lot about their influence, I do miss, and I wish that I had spoken Spanish so that I could have gotten to know my grandparents much better. Yeah. Like I feel like, you know, they've all since passed away, and the little bit of like language that we could share was great, but like it wasn't enough to share all the things, you know? It wasn't enough to like know like their real struggles and where they came from, you know? And it really reflects, because like the grandparents that I had that spoke English, very close to them. The grandparents that only spoke Spanish, I was like, hola, you know, like there was so much missing, you know? And so that's one of the things where it's like when we talk about minding our stories and like representation, like that language barrier sometimes comes in the way of us being able to tap into those stories, you know, and histories.
I think it's super important, and I've felt that so often with my relatives, and even with my own dad, you know, who spoke mostly Spanish, and we're very close. I mean, I love him, but I always feel like there's going to be some sort of like limit at a certain point of like how much can you connect with someone that you can't speak as freely as you could potentially, you know. I think that's like a very sort of like profound thing that maybe hasn't been explored so much in the Latino community, but anyway, that's crazy.
No, well, we just tackled one of our goals, which is to talk about differences within the Latino community. And I can tell you, I understand how some of the recent immigrants feel defensive of the language, but you know, brother, if you come here and you are not willing to understand my reality and the history of my family and the discrimination that Latinos have suffered for not being able to speak English properly, you know, don't come telling me that now I need to speak Spanish like they do it in Argentina, man, because it's not fair.
Isn't that something? They want to strip the language from you and then be mad at you that they can't send you off to cover something because you don't speak Spanish.
Exactly. But so let's talk a little bit about what you see as a commonality among these very diverse, very different. Porque, you know, it's so funny. I always say that, you know, when you talk about the dominant culture or the mainstream culture, or whatever, there's the assumption that everybody's different. But when you look at minorities, like let's say Latino community, everybody's the same, and everybody represents everybody else. It's like you speak up. It's like, yeah, because you people. So, I mean, I don't know.
I mean, that's the madness of like white supremacy, right? That like white people get to be individual, independent, and representative of their like soul personhood. And then people of color, like all black people are this, all Mexicans are that, all Muslims are this. And it's like this myth that they perpetuate so that they can shield themselves from like the horrors that they've committed in this country. And it's like, but we know that that's not true at all. And so it's kind of like, it's kind of like frustrating, because it's like when I think of the Latino community and what like unites us, sometimes I'm like, we're united in navigating this crap, you know. We are united in like seeing each other in our full humanity, you know. We are united in like uplifting each other, I think, because it's like and there is colorism in ours, right? Like Latinos are also like probably making assumptions about Asian folks and this and that, but it's like we know that we're different. We know that if you're going to watch the soccer game, that Mexico is going to have certain, like, calls and chants, and then Guatemala and this and that. You know what I mean? Like,
when you're running out of chances, it's like, listen, you know, like, Honduras, you better freaking win.
I know, right?
Don't let us down.
I'm still here, Honduras. I'm here for you. Puerto Ricans from the Bronx, unite for Honduras.
From your perspective in the news world.
Yeah, I think it mirrors kind of what they have to say, because within the Hispanics in the newsroom that I work with, you know, we're so different. We're from Colombia, we're from, you know, from even Spain, South America. My family's Cuban and Puerto Rican. So we all, when we bond, it's through our own differences and cultures, almost in the same way we would interact with, you know, somebody from Europe, or just, you know, a normal white person from somewhere else in America that we're on a story with, engaging with. But then when it comes time to talk about like the Latino story, there's this immediate like, okay, the three of us, let's go in and pitch this story, or the three of us can work on this. There's been times when I'm in the field, and I work with a Colombian journalist back in New York often. You know, food, language, for all intents and purposes, very different. And then I'll call her and be like, hey, I've got this video coming in with an interview. Can you help translate it and make sure it's done properly? So I think that we understand our own differences amongst each other. But when it comes to, like, you know, especially at the network level, where everything can be very just broad and just like broad paint strokes about everything, we do tend to kind of meld together to help our voice get out there. You know, it's almost like step one, like, let's get out there, let's get coverage, let's make sure we're being represented and telling our own stories. Then once we've got their ears, like, let's show them the differences here. And to me, like, that's really important. And that's, you know, I think it falls like in the same way. Like, again, with the whole journalism, shouldn't be me telling the narrative, but like, let's get it out there first. Then we'll work on like differentiating between the two.
Yeah, I'm just gonna mirror that, because I feel like everyone in Los Angeles that is sort of in this like Hollywood clique of Latinos, that's our goal. It's like,
right.
Our step one is like, let's get Latinos on screen, whether it's your like iPhone, or if it's on like a major motion picture. Like, let's just get them on screen, and then exactly, and then we can sort of from there we can work to build more awareness. But that's step one, and that's a big step. So
yeah, I mean, at least I can only speak to my field. I don't think that we're there yet in terms of like the full narrative of Hispanic culture, or for the percentages that we are in the United States, we don't get that same percentage in media representation. So like, we've got goals. Like, let's hit that goal, and then we'll go from there. And actually, like, we just want to work off my other, I was saying like there's a twofold, and it just hit me again. You know, that's also I don't want to make it seem like that we're just working towards covering Hispanic or like Latino stories. You know, there's no reason that a Latino shouldn't be able to tell somebody else's story, or go abroad, or go to the Middle East and tell a story through my lens and my world. You know, there's this idea that like, oh great, you're Latino, like, so you'll just do like the Latino stuff, right? And it's like, I can do that because I do come from that world, but I can also give you an interesting perspective on what else is going on in the world, what's going on in your part of the world.
Totally.
And so that's important as well.
Yo, and there's so much power, right? Like, we are like the #1 movie ticket buying group in the country. Yeah, like,
that makes so much sense.
Listen, like,
so many movies.
Right, like,
so many movies.
Like, and that alone is like, well, let's remember that that's almost like its own vote, right? Like, if we're tired of seeing certain stories, why is our money going to that story? You know what I mean? If we want to hear other stories, and we're really about like not just diversity, but like excitement and magic. Like, I want to know what it's like in other countries. I want to know what it's like for you to be like the nerdiest Honduran ever, and your movie is about like your desire to be on Star Trek, you know, whatever wild story it is, like that's where we can put like our money and our focus, you know what I mean? So it's like, yes, representation, and yes, but like these folks, these industries, they care about money.
And I would just say that right now it's particularly a good time if any of you guys make any sort of content, like a podcast or any sort of short film, if you can get it out there and you can get it noticed by anyone, and you know, it's good and it's something that people would want to see, like now is the time to strike, because I you know, I talk to like my friends who are managers, my friends who are agents, my friends who are producers, and they're like, we want to find this. So it's like, okay, well, let me show you some, you know, but right now is the time for sure. The iron is hot.
You know, that's an interesting divide too. I'm thinking like, as young people, do you feel connected to Latinos who do work in their 30s, 40s? Like, do you feel connected to the media and the things that we do, or is it like, man, y'all are old, you're like missing out, like, you don't even know the new social media that we use, like, you know, it's called like the Bodega app, you know, like, like you know what I'm saying? So, you know, I'm always like, we should invest in youth communities, but it's like, and then people are like, but how, but where, you know? So, yeah, I mean, that's something for y'all to think about too, like, who do you want to see your stuff? How do you want to navigate like the way that you put your stories into the world? Do you feel like we are paying attention to you? You know what I mean?
Question. Okay, this is a quick one. It could be either a. This is gonna sound so boring. Sorry. No, but I want you to tell me a specific teacher or a specific course or a book that literally changed your life. I had an art teacher, art history teacher actually, when I was in high school, and this woman was brilliant, and she made me feel smart. And her name is Maria Gracia Gamarra, and it was like life changing. I mean, all of a sudden, like I would look at a painting and I said, "Oh, look at this! This is a Velázquez, and you know he painted his girlfriend and blah, blah, blah." But there was something about someone who was so good at explaining what she knew that made me feel intelligent, because I could understand what she was talking about, and opened up the whole world of basically art and music. Actually, was part of the thing. So tell me about yours. Go ahead. The big one.
Lynn Milner, Florida Gulf Coast University. Do I get to elaborate more?
Yeah. Okay. What did she teach you?
She was my journalism professor for 4 years at FGCU, and it was as simple as. I think it was as simple as identifying somebody with a passion and just handing them the resources. Like, so much of the struggle that our community comes from is the lack of resources to do what we want. You know, the privilege in this world is like wanting to do something and then just having the resources to be able to do it. Like, it's that simple. And I think it took her for me. I said, I really want to be a journalist, and like, you felt like you need to like convince people. And it's like, great, here's a camera, go do it. It's like, oh, okay. So I guess now I have to be a journalist, right? You know, like I've been given the resources. So for me, that was that person who was like, you know, of course, that 4 years of education that she helped me navigate that world. But it was as simple as like, oh, you want to do it? Like, here, go ahead. And it was that, and here I am. So.
Wow, Benito.
Yeah, I mean, I had sort of similar experience, but in high school, I had. Patricia Kojon, she was my theater teacher, and I took theater sort of by chance, just because I needed an elective for whatever reason. And you know, she did the same thing. She was like, "Oh, you want to be a director? Okay, well, you direct this play." And so,
so simple.
Yeah, exactly. But it was true. I mean, it was like I was terrified to do it because it's like everyone's going to see my work, and it's going to be in front of the entire school, and this is crazy. But the reality is like if you can encourage someone at an early age to do the thing that they are passionate about, they want to do, then like that, since then, it stemmed so much confidence in me to just, you know, move forward and be like, yeah, I'm going to be a director, I'm going to direct. And like, I've been doing it since high school, so I know how to do it. You know what I'm saying? So that was so influential to me. And the other one was Shauna Meyer, also out of my high school, who just sort of gave me the sociological tools to sort of understand my place in this world. I think it's so easy to be ignorant about the oppression that, you know, in this country and sort of what the forces that are invisible you're sort of always coming up against. And it can be daunting and frustrating and depressing, but I guess I'd rather know and go through the depression and work through it and to understand exactly what I'm up against. Because, you know, the odds are sort of stacked against you in certain ways. And as long as you know it, then that's how you fight it. And so it's tough, but you know, those are the two teachers that I would say.
Yeah. Well, my mom was a teacher, so my first teacher in pre-K and kindergarten was my mom, and so she taught me how to read and write. So that was like the beginning of the amazing magic, right? But in college, you know, I grew up in a religious household, so I had a lot of questions about God and like queerness and like, you know, just like what the Bible had to say and all this stuff. So I was at college, and one of my professors, Dr. Kelly Brown Douglas, she's a black womanist theologian. One of her books is Sexuality in the Black Christ, and she just, I don't know, saw something to me and connected to me and was also like, you're also one of the only Latinos in the whole class, and thankfully she was like, I'm gonna claim you too, you know, and like saw in me that I had this like creative spark and that I wanted to write, and she was the one that encouraged me to always write no matter what I was studying, like religion or economics or whatever it is, to always keep that passion. And she always challenged me. She always utilized the language of like her PhD around me. You know, she didn't talk down to me. We always had these like really elevated conversations, and she always put books in my hands. Like she was the one that put Zora Neale Hurston in my hands. She gave me James Baldwin. Like she gave me Audre Lorde. She gave me Jean Cordova. Like she was able to like elevate these things in me and manifest who I am in ways that I was just like, I had no idea. I was just glad that somebody was like paying attention to me and cared about me and my growth, and someone that took me seriously as like a young human trying to navigate this world, you know? So, Goucher College, Professor Kelly Brown Douglas, if you're watching, hi, I miss you, I love you.
If you had to go back to college, what is it that you wish you had learned, and then you say, damn, why, God, why? Why didn't I learn that when I went to college?
Listen, there's this book called Queer Brown Voices, and it talks about all the Latino activists from the 50s, 60s, and 70s that were working for like immigration, that got caught up in like the AIDS crisis all through Texas, the Southwest, the lower parts of California. And I remember reading this book and being like, what? I'm not the first. Like, we have existed. We have been in this struggle. Oh my God. Like, I literally remember being here in DC, reading that book and like just kind of like weeping a little bit on a bench and being like, if I had known that there were others before me, then maybe I would have been able to see myself as like a natural part of society, like a normal person, like someone who is excavating truth and trying to find their path, and that isn't like the anti, like that isn't like the bad thing. That's the good thing. That's what we have been doing. I wish there was a way for like that, I guess, American Latino history and culture to be part of my school experience, you know, to be part of like higher education. Because it's like everybody wants to praise you and be like, oh my God, you're the smartest Latino, you're the first Latino. And that's great, but that is a lonely ass place. And it is isolating, and it can get you like right in your heart. Like if you mess up, are you gonna ruin everything for everybody? You know, and so reading about like real time, real history ancestors in this struggle, like it just gave me a lot of strength. And it made me mad too, because I was like, this country doesn't have the right to take that from me, and they did anyway, you know?
Yeah. Benito, how are you?
I'm still thinking, you know. That's such a good one.
It could be anything. It could be accounting. It could be like, you know.
No, I mean, that was such a, I mean, I hate to just mirror what you said.
Baking, you know.
Yeah, no, I mean, honestly.
Cooking for yourself.
And add that book to your reading list. Like, I think a lot of times we also segregate by sexuality. And if you're like maybe a straight Latino dude holding a book that's like Queer Brown Voices, you're gonna, but it's like, get over that and remember that we are fighting for you too, you know what I mean? And that our stories are your stories too, you know, and that like, yeah, sorry to interrupt.
No, it's all good. I guess mine's a little more boring and maybe analytical, but I do wish that I had taken some just like finance classes and things like that. Yeah. Just because, especially now where I'm getting to the point where it's like, okay, like I have my ideas and I've sort of seen how these other guys have made these films and things like that. It's like, okay, well, let me start like trying to bring some equity into my stuff and trying to build something, you know? So for me, I suppose that I wish I had taken some business classes and things like that to understand how to do the business part of it, but maybe that's why you have business partners, you know? gotta find somebody.
That's not boring at all. Like, how many of
That's
us,
such a good point.
we don't know how to say, we don't know how to do the stock market.
Right,
like,
right.
And for anything that is creative, I think that
Well, I
is
was
the biggest
thinking
downfall.
when I first started out of college, I was just like journalism, video, and then like you start doing it, and people are like giving you money, and you need to track down money. I was a freelancer for 3 years, and I didn't show up at math class, like, and it was just like it was a real. I probably spent 50% of my time trying to do finances to chase down paychecks, as much as I was doing writing and journalism. So like that's such an excellent point. I remember thinking that, going like, man, if I just knew how to like, set up this separate account or something like that. But yeah, going back to college, I feel like I would have wanted to hear somebody say this, and like, this is not a discredit to people who are really thriving in college, but I just was never one of those persons. I was very much like a practical, in the field type of person. I learned when I was there and I saw it and it was happening in front of me, and when I was reading it in a book, it just never really captured my attention, so my grades always tended to slip. And I always wanted somebody to kind of come up and be like, it's okay, I come from a family of doctors, and it's like, you had to have this and that, and then this gets you into this, and I was just never on that track. And talking to myself back then, I feel like I would have loved to hear somebody say, like, hey man, like, it's gonna be all right. Like, you love what you do, you're good at it. That C or F at times does not represent who you are,
Yeah.
And I feel like in college, like, I have a younger sister who, like, since middle school, they've been prepping her for college, and like the lunacy and the madness of that is just that by the time you get to college, you're so wound tight and stressed about what's going to happen there. And I think that, like, if you really go into it with a strong passion and identifying what you want to do early, that's important. If you want to be a doctor, get good grades, but I can only speak to my field, that it wasn't as necessary, and I felt like I stressed a lot over it, only to graduate and realize that no one since that day has asked me what I got in my classes.
Okay, so I don't want to. This is gonna sound like a downer. Hopefully, it is not. But yeah, I've written about this. The issues with this whole concept of like you can achieve anything you want if you really, really want it, which I think is not entirely true. I think that, and I think that when you get out of college and you start working and you start having some professional achievements, your definition of success changes, and for good reasons. It's like all of a sudden, like I might, let's face it, I'll never be Kate Blanchett as much as I wish I was. No, I mean it doesn't matter. Like there's only one David Letterman. He's not even there anymore.
Right.
But so I always think that it's interesting to know what your definition of success is now that you have, obviously some professional achievements, not to kind of like hold you back or anything, but just to give you a realistic idea of how we change as we grow older and we understand a little bit more the world that is out there in front of us. So how has your definition of success changed?
Yeah, I mean, for me, that's a constantly revolving door. I think I'm one of the fortunate people who, at an early age, I said I want to be a journalist, and then there came this point where I was a journalist, and I was like very young, and I was like, oh, great, like now what? Like I felt like part of the fun was like that chase of getting up to that point. Had you asked me like 5 years ago, what would you be doing with your life? I would have told you I would be living in a foxhole somewhere in the Middle East, covering wars for the rest of my life. I spent a year in Afghanistan covering the war in Afghanistan, which was a dream of mine. I had tons of friends who were soldiers. Our generation has been fighting these wars for all these years, and I always felt like it was like the story of my generation, and it was the biggest story to be had. So if you asked me 5 years ago, my definition of success would have been to be a foreign correspondent covering wars abroad. And I did that. And there was like this point where I'm like sitting in a foxhole in Afghanistan covering a war abroad, and I was like, wow, like I'm doing that. And then the reality sets in of like, oh my God, I'm sitting in Afghanistan covering a war abroad. And the realities of just war in general, and the fact that that's not necessarily a healthy way to live your life. And then so there was like this very like, dead block or wall in my track of success. It was like, okay, I really need to, I wasn't personally happy. I was glad with the work, but I wasn't happy with where I was at in life in this particular situation. And like, so how do you divert from that, And I sort of like, I quit that job and I did a little freelance work in Latin America. I traveled around doing this, and like I think I'm still in that like world of now, like where do I where do I fall from that, where like I had what I wanted and it wasn't necessarily what I want to do for the rest of my life. Where I'm at now is, to me, sort of like a happy medium between the travel. I travel a lot, probably on the road like 3 or 4 days a week, if not more. But also still having like the stability of a network that's backing you. A lot of my issues with working as a freelancer abroad was that it was just incredibly dangerous to be doing it by yourself. And knowing that if something were to happen, that there'd be nobody there to help you. I have that safety net now that makes me a little more comfortable to go out and do different stories. But am I like 100% happy and success where I'm at? Like it's constantly changing. When I got this job, I was like, boom, I've done it again. I'm successful in my mind and I'm real happy. And then time goes on, you're like, oh, but like, you know, it'd be really interesting to try this and try this. In this field in particular, in the media world, like we do have the luxury, I think, of bouncing around a lot, and it doesn't hurt your credibility. If you're a doctor and then the next day you want to be a lawyer and then the next day you want to be an astronaut, I think people would be like, okay, like take it easy, man. Like figure out what you want to do. In our world, and I don't know how many of you are actually interested in this, but you really can navigate different fields. Whether right now I'm very much a breaking news reporter. When something happens, you know, I may have to go today. I don't know. But maybe one day I can do a documentary like Alberto does, or one day I can even work on a fiction film based off a true story or something. Yeah. So like there's a lot of different avenues that I think that we can, as we grow older and define our success, we can sort of meld into. I'm happy with where I'm at now, so maybe you can ask me like 10 years and I'll let you know how it changed.
Gabby, you?
I mean, success, right? Like, are you happy? Are you fed? Are you like thriving? Are you connected to your community? Are you like, have you set like at least a small amount of goals that you've been able to like accomplish, you know? You don't necessarily have to do it all on your own. Like, I lived in my mama's basement to finish my first book, you know, and that at first I felt like embarrassed, you know, and then I remember that a lot of the concepts that we have about what it means to be independent or successful are based on like mainstream American media that has no understanding of how we function as groups and big families, how we can support each other. So
I'm moving back with my mom if things get ugly. I mean, that is one of the biggest advantages of being a Latino.
I was going to say, that's a luxury that not everyone does.
Your mom never wanted you to leave in the first place. So it's like, you know, are you an active member of like your community? Are you making space for other folks? Like, success is like, what have you accomplished the things that you wanted to do? Are you happy? Are you moving forward? One thing that my mom told me that I never forgot was like 5 years. If you look back in a 5-year period and everything is exactly the same and you didn't even try to like shift or upgrade or do, you're in the same maybe bad funk, bad relationship, then you got to reevaluate. In 5 years, there should be like some growth that you feel proud of. You know what I mean? And it doesn't necessarily mean that like you're caking in dough, that means you're successful. Or you got this many followers on Instagram, that means you're successful. You know, success is in here. You know what I mean? It's in here and it's in what you can give out. And you know, there are real life logistics. Like, are you able to like live in in an apartment? Can you pay your rent? Can you have food on the table? For me, my success has allowed me to like make space for my brother. So now my brother can come and pay an easier rent, and we live in an apartment together, and we both make sure there's food on the table. So I'm successful, but we are thriving. You know what I mean? And so that to me is success.
Right in Hollywood. Tell us.
Yeah, so I guess, you know, speaking about 5 years ago, I was actually at a post-collegiate seminar here for the young ambassadors, and I wrote down my 5-year goal was to, in 5 years, be working on or starting a feature film. It hasn't happened, but, you know, one thing that I sort of took from that is just I had that end goal, and any sort of decision that I was making professionally was like, let me just get myself in a position to get closer to that every single time. You know, you can lay out all these plans and you can think like, okay, I'm gonna like work for this company and then that's gonna lead to this and this and this. But I guess if I've learned anything in my limited time as a professional, it's just like all those plans like can go by the wayside, like just like that, you know. And as long as you're sort of positioning yourself in a place where it's like, I'm gonna move somewhat forward towards my goal, you know, things tend to work out. So you know, I never thought that from working at Creative Artists Agency in LA, I was going to work with J.J. Abrams and their team at Bad Robot. Like, it never crossed my mind that I would ever work at that company. But just because I was in a position to do it, I was able to go and have a successful time there. You know, I think what you said is also great, just like making time for yourself, like to in your community, you know, because what I see so often, especially with my peer group, is just like throwing yourself in the work and then just letting yourself like spiritually and mentally just sort of wilt, and that's so dangerous, and I do want to caution you guys about that, because I was very much the same way. It's like I'm gonna go and I'm gonna just like throw myself into this work and not even make time for myself, and it can be so unhealthy and can really put a damper on yourself professionally, and just, you know, if you burn out, like you're never gonna reach your goals, and so that's a big caution, I would say. But for me, I don't know, like I'm still trying to make the feature, you know. It takes a little longer than you might expect too.
Oh my God, yes, give yourself some time.
Yeah, give yourself some time, like breathe.
Oh my God, I was 23 and I was like, why am I not famous yet? Jesus! You know, and it's like I'm 35 and I'm finally getting to where I want to be. Like, so much time. And the things that you don't get, like the things that you are not selected for, the things that you are not chosen to do, they're not for you. And it is okay to let them go. And you can keep trying, try again, but remember, like, don't let that be the thing that takes you out of everything else, that knocks you out the game.
And I would add one other thing. With the world we live in with social media now, do not start comparing yourself to your peers. You're gonna graduate college, and all of a sudden it's gonna be a big Facebook off of who's living the coolest and best life. I mean, that's the truth. And it will make you miserable. It truly will make you miserable if, like, every day you're like, okay, well, this person did this and this, so now he's only 27, he did this, and she's 23, and what she did. Like, don't do it. Everyone has their own path. Everyone has their own way in the world and their own timeline, and people operate at different speeds, and trying to do that is an incredibly quick way to burn yourself out before your
If you need a mantra, just repeat compare and despair. Because that's what they say. That's very 12-step-ish.
It's so much a part of our world now.
That's such a thing to say, you know what I mean? Like, you need a mantra, compare and despair.
Compare and despair, one at a time. Yeah, praise the Lord. Now, okay, we have 2 minutes, so you have literally a quick word of advice, but you just gave yours.
Yeah, that's mine.
Compare and despair.
I sit on that
quick word of advice.
I mean, I guess I decided to don't burn out, and just know that luck does have to do a little bit with your professional career. So just make sure you're in a position to be lucky. You know what I'm saying? You have to do that prep work, but be in a position to be lucky.
Yeah, and have each other's backs. Protect each other as like fellow women, as fellow Latinas, like and Latinos. Stick up for each other, you know what I mean? Like, make sure that whatever privileges that you hold, that you utilize to open doors and elevate each other. Because when it comes to those corporate spaces, y'all are gonna need each other. And the last thing, the worst thing, oh my God, the one I hate the most is when you see that other Latina and she is not here for you. He is not here for you. They're here for whatever corporate entity or whatever other thing. Like, have each other's backs. Yeah. And eat good food.
Yes.
Yeah, eat good food.
My very humble advice, especially like after college, you're probably going to work in a corporation or some kind of like company. Be the person you'd like to work with. Because there's nothing, you know, sometimes we're like, okay, as soon as I get my foot in the door, I'm going to like, you know, have one knife in each hand. You might get something or you might not. And if you don't, then everybody's going to hate you, and it's going to be at the very beginning of your career, and you're not going to have any friends to recommend you for the next job. So I think there's a lot of messages in the media that encourage this, you know, kind of survivor mentality. And that's just good for television.
Listen, be tough on the system and soft with each other.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Oh,
that's beautiful. We're gonna open the floor for what does that mean? Okay, everybody. Okay. We have to talk more.
No, we have one question from the Facebook Live. In terms of
people are watching. No.
Thousands of people are watching us. Smile.
I'm not on mic, but there is one question. In terms of your future hopes for how to represent the Latino community in your art forms, where do you hope it goes from here?
Okay, so where do you hope that, how do you think you're going to be able to represent the Latino community in the news, on film, on books and comic books?
Well, where do I hope it goes from here? I hope we get to the point where it's not necessary, where we're not saying, my gosh, we need more Latinos in the news. It can only be my hope that I don't feel like I'm fighting for our narrative anymore in the future. When you say you're fighting for something, you hope that there's an end to that. So 10, 15 years down the road, or the journalists that I train, I hope that they don't feel like they're going into the industry without a voice or having to fight for the voice. But again, I think it goes to what she said earlier, like, I'm not the first and I won't be the last. But can I hope that would be the case, that we've done so well and we've imprinted ourselves in the industry so well that we don't have to fight for it anymore? That would definitely be my hope. My hope, just real quick, is for it to be less broad, for it to grow from just being like an immigration story or a crime story. I mean, those are all very valid stories, but I would just hope that in the future, creatives would have especially Latino creatives, would have the flexibility and the opportunity to make any story that they want to make. And so I guess it's just to escape the pigeonhole, and to open up the world to experiences from Latinos that are a little more, just less broad, open it up.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, like, I imagine that we are going to continue to not only just tell our stories as Latinos, but also tackle, like, how we feel about gender and how we feel about sexuality and what it means to, like, navigate our different religions and our abilities, you know what I mean? Like, I see the same thing. I just want, if I can tell wild and crazy stories, then I hope that the next young people that come blow those out of the water and create worlds that, I don't know, only exist in our daydreams, right? Anything's possible. And that we also control the production distribution of our stories, too.
That's a good one.
So we're good. And gonna have questions after? All right.
Yeah.
So we're gonna say goodbye to our Facebook friends. It was wonderful to be with you. I don't know if you guys.